So I'm going to continue talking about the Psalms. We're going to begin with Psalm 63, which is titled, "My Soul Thirsts for You," a psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. I was thinking today, it's often the case that when I imagine myself in a potential position where my character is tested, my resolve is tested, my strength is tested, I often imagine myself overcoming whatever adversity that the test puts in front of me. But I think in reality, what often happens is that we crumple under the weight and under the pressure of the test. And so the thing to do is to figure out the right combination so that one doesn't buckle under such pressures and stresses. Not some quick fix, but some deep foundational repair that provides stability in all cases. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you. As in a dry and weary land where there is no water, I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed, I meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be a portion for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by him shall exult. For the mouths of liars will be stopped. And so, as we've mentioned at the outset, that this testing of one's resolve, of one's uprightness in the face of challenge and adversity, I think we see it here in this psalm, this asking pretty much of the same question, of looking for that answer, but also of recognizing where the answer lies. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. And that's the key, that earnest seeking. Because we all desire to be strong and resolute in times of conflict. But how many of us are earnest in the pursuit of actually gaining that resolve? How many of us have the soul that thirsts for the very thing that gives us stability and peace of mind, strength of character? David says, we have to remember that David here is in the wilderness. He is alone. He is without the modern comforts in the sense of the civilizational comforts, which may include access to food, warmth, shelter. He says, "My flesh faints for you." And so what can this mean? The flesh, of course, literally, is of the skin, of the bones, of the muscles, the bodily portion of the human being. And for something to faint is to lose consciousness. And so it's interesting that the flesh is the thing that faints. But when it's put in context with the next line, "My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." Now, of course, in a dry and weary land where there is no water, the body fails. And just like the statement before, following the analogy, my soul thirsts for you. So in the similar sense of the base desire of the body needing water to sustain itself, to give it composure, to give it strength, to keep it going, the same applies to that of the soul and of the divine. That is, that the divine is the very thing that provides nourishment for the soul. And we have mentioned many potential components of this soul. Of course, the soul in suffering in the face of adversity. But where exactly is this soul? I would argue that it is the totality of the human being. That is his physical form as well as his psychological makeup. One is inseparable from the other. And I think we can, if we fail to properly move from the analogy of purely the bodily requiring water so that the cells don't shrivel up and die, so that our blood has enough volume to flow through our system. If we fail with this analogy to map it directly onto that of the soul and that of the divine, because we fail to recognize what the divine is or what the soul is, we merely have to go back and to reflect on experience, just as all of us understand what it means to be thirsty. We certainly all understand what it means to be insecure, left without something important, left without purpose or meaning, without love, let's say. And although we don't experience the divine in the same way as we experience the quenching of the thirst with a cold glass of water, we do experience it when we are loved by those that are close to us. We do experience it when we find solace after a period of struggle. This is, in essence, our interaction with this divine nature, this divine spirit. So I've looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. And so I think, as we've mentioned many times, this process, this interaction, this continual pondering of what it means to quench the thirst of the soul, this purely this force that is driven purely by human will to reach some conclusion, some satisfaction. I think this procedure is fundamental. That is, looking upon God in the sanctuary, finding that place, finding that spirit and that force. Because this steadfast love is better than life. And if you have a belief and understanding of a love that transcends this material existence, this worldly existence, then what are the sufferings of this life and of this world? So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you upon my bed, and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. And so David here, in his suffering, is recognizing the importance of this procedure, of returning to this thoughtfulness, this mindfulness, of returning to that place of divine authority, recognizing it and incorporating it into his being. This is fundamentally important, I think. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. Psalm 64. Hide me from the wicked. To the choir master, a psalm of David. Hear my voice, O God, in my complaint. Preserve my life from dread of my enemy. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the throng of evildoers, who whet their tongue like swords, who aim bitter words like arrows, shooting from ambush at the blameless, shooting at him suddenly and without fear. They hold fast to their evil purpose. They talk of laying snares secretly, thinking, who can see them? They search out injustice, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search, for the inward mind and heart of a man are deep. But God shoots his arrow at them. They are suddenly wounded. They are brought to ruin, with their own tongues turned against them. All who see them will wag their heads. Then all mankind fears. They tell what God has brought about and ponder what he has done. Let the righteous one rejoice in the Lord and take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart exalt. And who can say, referring back to what we said at the outset about the suffering in the face of adversity, who is to say that this suffering is not brought on by his fellow man? I think it often is the case that other people are the cause of our suffering. And so, in this light, in this sense of adversity, this sense of suffering. Again, in the context of the causal factor being an enemy, another human being. Hear my voice, O God, in my complaint. Preserve my life from dread of the enemy. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the throngs of evildoers. And we find metaphor here that is common throughout the Psalms, referring to tongues as swords, these sort of sharp stabbing objects, violent, piercing, injurious. Bitter words like arrows, again a similar metaphor. Shooting from ambush at the blameless, because in a sense they're easy targets. Shooting at him suddenly and without fear, because you don't fear something that you don't believe is dangerous. You don't fear something that has the potential to harm you back. That does not have the potential to harm you back. They hold fast to their evil purpose. They talk of laying snares secretly, thinking, who can see them? They search out injustice, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search. And this verse 6, I think is the profound verse of this psalm. They search out injustice, that being the wicked, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search. Meaning that they have sought out, perhaps they've sought out a place to place their own suffering, to transmit it to another, or to fulfill their own purposes, rather than to have their purpose fulfilled by a higher power. They seek to rob another of theirs. For the inward mind and heart of a man are deep. And I think that is the fundamental line. For the inward mind and heart of a man are deep. They search out injustice, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search. For the inward mind and heart of man are deep. And this is what comprises the diligent search. This planting of the snare deep within the heart or deep within the mind, to have this type of impact that leads to the failure of character, that leads to the failure of resolve in the face of adversity. But God shoots its arrows at them. They are suddenly wounded. They are brought to ruin with their own tongues burned against them. All who see them will wag their heads. And so by what reason can we be certain of this? That God shoots his arrows at them. Certainly we would like to imagine that this is the case, that the wicked suffer, that they are judged at some point. They are brought to justice for the crimes that they've committed against us. Unfortunately, this psalm, it doesn't give us good reason, but rather a statement to be tested. That all mankind fears. And they would fear because even the earthly force of man that robs another of his meaning and his purpose, the most fundamental thing that forms the basis of his soul, the rich soil from which blossoms the tree of life. This can be robbed by another man. But this fear comes in through the understanding that even the wicked can suffer this robbery. Now this robbery is a just one. It is from the divine to rectify the wrongs, to bring the wicked to justice. They tell what God has brought about and ponder what he has done. Let the righteous one rejoice in the Lord and take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart exalt. Psalm 65. O God of our salvation. To the choir master, a psalm of David, a song. Praise is due to you, O God in Zion, and to you shall vows be performed. O you who hear prayer, to you shall all flesh come. When iniquities prevail against me, you atone for your transgressions. Blessed is the one you choose and bring near, to dwell in your courts. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house, the holiness of your temple. By awesome deeds you answer us with righteousness, O God of our salvation, the hope of all the ends of the earth and the farthest seas, the one who is by his strength established the mountains, being girded with might, who stills and roars of the seas, who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples, so that those who dwell at the ends of the earth are in awe at your signs. You make the going out of the morning and the evening to shout for joy. You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, for so you have prepared it. You water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with abundance. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. So, to bring this back around, the title of the psalm is, O God of our salvation. Now, salvation, not only do I think of this as a saving, but of a preserving, a continuation, a prevention from harm. Not all harm, of course. Testing is required of every individual to prove their worth, to see if they're actually the resolute individuals that are the God-fearing individuals that are worthy of God's love. And you can only be worthy of God's love if you are able to accept it, be strong enough to accept it. And it's not an easy thing to accept, because in accepting this love, we have to sacrifice certain things. We have to sacrifice things that are dear to us. That is sort of inherent in the idea of a sacrifice. That is, we give up so that we may receive. Now, what specifically might the sacrifice be? It could be any number of things. I think fundamentally, the sacrifice that every one of us must give is the sacrifice of mind, the sacrifice of a certain way of being that in the end leads to uncertainty, destabilization, but in the moment it feels like the warmest warmth, like a drug addict in the thralls of his addiction, not thinking about the future, only about satisfying the present. And so this sacrifice is a fundamental sacrifice of the self that we are all born with. It's a particular combination, I think, that allows us to be in line with the divine. Certain things we just cannot do if we are to maintain this communication and to truly accept the love and the grace of the ever after, of the infinite beyond, of truth itself. It is at once exceedingly difficult, and at another time, the most simple thing that any of us can ever do. How difficult is it for many of us to sit still in a room and to be at peace? I can tell you that it's nearly impossible for me, and I work at it every day. Given the numerous distractions that we have in front of us in the modern day, I think it only tempts us away from the sacrifices that we must give. It's a difficult thing, to be sure. So what can we say of this Psalm 65? So it is a song. It's a song of praise. In verse 2, O you who hear prayer, to you shall all flesh come. Interesting. O you who hear prayer, referring to God, referring to any divine spirit or divine force. To you shall all flesh come. And I think that just refers to, rather simplistically, the flesh of man. The earthly creation. But I think in combination with the first line, O you who hear prayer, so for those who have the ability to perceive and to recognize what prayer means, this sort of higher nature, that could be the conscious mind of man as well. This is the thing that unites the flesh. This is one that recognizes it, and pays attention to the prayer. When iniquities prevail against me, you atone for our transgressions. And I think this is another fundamental point here. Atonement for our transgressions. When iniquities prevail against me, in those moments that I mentioned, of that failure of character, that moment when we should have spoken up when we didn't. We should have helped another when we didn't. We should have done this when we should have done that. We know these things intuitively. This sort of internal judge, this conscience. When these iniquities have prevailed against me, you atone for our transgressions, which means the very thing that allows us to see, the very intelligibility that allows us to connect, to come to terms, to understand why we performed in the way that we did so unsatisfactorily in the face of adversity. The very thing that makes us understand this and makes us feel okay, in a sense, because we understand it, we know how to avoid it next time. It is because of this. It's very simple. Again, it is the intelligibility. That's it. It is the very fact that intelligibility and recognition and understanding exist that we are able to improve. We're able to move up towards something greater, towards the divine, to the greatest of all things, that is considered the highest goodness, the highest good. Blessed is the one you choose and bring near to dwell in your courts. We shall be satisfied with goodness of your house, the holiness of your temple. Now, of course, the one that is close to the courts is close to the understanding of judgment. This is the person that understands fully, or understands well, that what plagues them at present. They know how to stand up tall in the face of this plague. They know how to stand up tall again in the face of adversity, in the face of suffering, anxiety, insecurity. By awesome deeds you answer us with righteousness, O God of our salvation, the hope of all ends of the earth and of the farthest seas. Again, this is, I think, a similar line to the point that I made earlier about the very nature of intelligibility. That it is because of God that is. It is the existence. It is the objective, in a sense. I think to say the objective is to dilute it a bit. But it is the truth. The truth that is independent from the conscious mind that may try to deceive itself that it doesn't exist. And this is the hope of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest seas, as far as the eye of man can see. And I like these next series of verses here. I think they mean quite a bit. The one who by his strength established the mountains. In other words, the mountains only have their strength because of something that is greater, that produced it. Being girded with might. Who stills the roaring seas, the roaring of their waves, and the tumult of the peoples, so that those who dwell at the ends of the earth are in awe at your signs. You make the going out of mourning and the evening to shout for joy. So back to verse 7, who stills the roaring seas. This is the force that brings, again, stability or order to the chaos, we could say. It brings peace to uncertainty. It brings strength to weakness. It is this balance. And just as we have it in nature, we have it in the tumult of peoples. Because what better analogy can we use of tumult of the peoples than the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves? It's sort of a direct analogy. It applies as much to nature as it does to the behavior of man. You visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. Again, it's this intelligibility that we were talking about, this understanding. The divine nature is the understanding. It is the raising of the inferior to the goodness. to the highest. And so what is it, the earth without the water? And the water in this sense, this enriching sense, I think we think of sort of like an agriculture, or of a forest that receives the rain that was otherwise in perhaps a drought. In this sort of biological sense, I think we can understand the symbolism of water and the enrichment that it brings. It brings life, it brings vibrancy. You watered its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with abundance. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks, and the valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. So you have this, again, this coming together. We started with purely water, that we started talking about various geological formations. Water is furrow, you water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, blessing its growth. Then we go into more complex matter, wagon tracks that overflow with abundance, pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy, the meadows clothe themselves with flocks. So we see this sort of coming to, the sort of more primitive nature moving towards some sort of complexity, unity, abundancy. Psalm 66. How awesome are your deeds. To the choir master, a song, a psalm. Shout for joy to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name. Give to him glorious praise. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. So great is your power that your enemies come cringing to you. All the earth worships you and sings praise to you. They sing praises to your name. Come and see what God has done. He is awesome in his deeds towards the children of man. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot. There did we rejoice him, who rules by his might forever, whose eyes keep watch on the nations. Let not the rebellious exalt themselves. Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard, who has kept our soul among the living, and has not let our feet slip. For you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water. Yet you have brought us out to a place of abundance. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will perform my vows to you, that which my lips uttered, and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer you burnt offerings of fattened animals. With the smoke of the sacrifice of rams, I will make an offering of bulls and goats. Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell what he has done for my soul. I cried to him with my mouth, and high praise was on my tongue. If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But truly God has listened. He has attended to the voice of my prayer. Blessed be God, but he has not rejected my prayer, or removed his steadfast love from me. So although this may seem, much of this psalm may seem basic, it is, again, once we get some words of wisdom, we have to put it into practice. Once we have this understanding, then we move into praise. Then we move back into understanding, move back into praise, move back into understanding, and back into praise. And so in verse 6, he says, he turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot. There did we rejoice him, who rules by his might forever. And so what can we make of it here? I certainly don't make of it any profound violation of nature. I see it as the coming to, the allowance, the affordance. And it's this affordance. It's at a scale that we quite don't understand. This affordance of nature to interact with us, potentially. It affords our existence, turning the sea into dry land, turning instability into stability, turning confusion into sense, turning pure matter into material that we can use for our purposes. They passed through the river on foot. And so this river, this torrent, that is largely unpassable because of its nature, we are afforded passage due to this understanding and due to what we have been given. Again, our intelligibility, our perceptibility, our will, our freedom of will. There did we rejoice in him, who rules by his might forever, whose eyes keep watch on the nations. Let not the rebellious exalt themselves. Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard, who has kept our soul among the living, and has not let our feet slip. Now this verse, I think, is fascinating. Verse 9. Now of God, who has kept our soul among the living. That's an interesting statement. Our soul. It refers to, so when we say our, this is a collective. This is a collective soul that this psalmist is talking about. Our soul among the living. That is just as a man of upright character forms a family for himself, passes on his values, his virtues to his children, perhaps to his community as well, being an upright, upstanding citizen in his business affairs. And that way his soul continues, because the very virtues continue. They continue in his children, they continue in his friends, they continue in his business associates, they continue perhaps in the business that he built himself. And like with many things in the Bible, they scale. And so we can say, just as this can happen to a man and his family, it can happen to a nation, it can happen to a people. The people have this sort of collective sense to them, a collective soul to them. Sometimes it's stronger than others, depending on the cultural binding. But a fascinating distinction nonetheless, I think. You brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire, through water, yet you have brought us out to a place of abundance. again, it returns back to what we were talking about the adversity, about staying faithful, that there is a truth, that there is a stabilizing force, that there is something that you can grab onto, even when the mind and perhaps people around you wish to tell you otherwise. There is a place to grab onto. Just as in the experience of the Israelites, where they were tested, where they were brought into the net, crushing burdens laid on their backs, men riding over their heads, their experience through the water and the fire. Yet they persevered, and they were led to a place of abundance. Now the cynic would say, well, the wicked can outlast things as well if they believe strongly in what they believe, and eventually the wicked's day will come and their abundance will be had, just as in the case of the good. I suppose that's an interesting argument. But I think of the wicked, they still pursue a good. They pursue their good. But it's the most upright good, the most righteous good, that provides us with the highest level of abundance, not just materially, but spiritually, and within the soul and within the heart, within the mind. And I think this is the distinction. This is the thing that dissolves the cynic's critique. And so from this place of abundance, now we've been given this wisdom. We've been given the wisdom after our profound experience with this testing. Now we return back to praise. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will perform my vows to you, that which my lips uttered and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer to you burnt offerings and fattened animals. With the smoke of sacrifice of rams, I will make an offering of bulls and goats. And it sort of continues in this way. And it's this series of affordances. I think that's fundamental here. This sort of, again, this, you stay strong, you learn, then you praise. You go through a new trial, you stay strong, resolute, you do not buckle, you learn, then you praise, you give thanks. And we grow through this process and through this sort of procedure. And in time we stand up tall, we stand upright, and we become virtuous people, moral people, ethical people. Psalm 67. Make your face shine upon us. To the choir master with stringed instruments, a psalm, a song. May God be gracious to us, and bless us, and make his face shine upon us, that your way may be known on earth, your saving power among all the nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy. For you judge the peoples with equity, and guide the nations upon the earth. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. The earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, shall bless us. God shall bless us. Let all the ends of the earth fear him. And of course, for the face of God to shine upon a people or a person is for them to see the truth. Is for them to see what is right. And once we see what is right, then we give praise. Again, it's this process that we were talking about. A short, sweet psalm here, but again, it just hammers this point home. Just like many many of the things in the Psalms. It's this continual hammering, this slow march of the biblical teachings. You may not understand it, but if you stay with it, it sort of becomes you. You become it. You become closer to it. Psalm 68. God shall scatter his enemies. To the choir master, a psalm of David, a song. God shall arise, his enemies shall be scattered, and those who hate him shall flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so you shall drive them away. As wax melts before fire, so the wicked shall perish before God. But the righteous shall be glad. They shall exult before God. They shall be jubilant with joy. Sing to God. Sing praises to his name. Lift up a song to him who rides through the deserts. His name is the Lord. Exalt before him. Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity. But the rebellious dwell in a parched land. O God, when you went out before your people, when you marched through the wilderness, the earth quaked, and the heavens poured down rain before God, the one of Sinai, before God, the God of Israel. Rain in abundance, O God, you shed abroad. You restored your inheritance as it languished. Your flock found dwelling in it. In your goodness, O God, you provided for the needy. The Lord gives the word. The women who announce the news are a great host. The kings of the armies, they flee. They flee. The women at home divide the spoil, though you men lie among the sheepfolds. The wing of a dove covered with silver, its pinions with shimmering gold. And when the Almighty scatters kings there, let snow fall on Zalman. O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan, O many-peaked mountain, mountain of Bashan. Why do you look with hatred, O many-peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode? Yes, where the Lord will dwell forever. The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. You ascend on high, leading host of captives in your train and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. Blessed be the Lord, who daily bears us up. God is our salvation. Our God is a God of salvation. And to God, the Lord, belong deliverance from death. But God will strike the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. The Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that you may strike your feet in blood, that the tongues of your dogs may have their portion from the foe. Your procession is seen, O God, the procession of my God, my King, into the sanctuary. The singers in front, the musicians last, between them virgins play tambourines. Bless God in the great congregation, the Lord, O you who are of Israel's fountain. There is Benjamin, the least of them, in the lead. The princes of Judah in their throng, the princes of Zebulun, the princes of Naphtali. Summon your power, O God, the power, O God, by which you have worked for us. Because of your temple at Jerusalem, kings shall bear gifts to you. Rebuke the beasts that dwell among the reeds, the herd of bulls with the calves of their peoples. Trample underfoot those who lust after tribute. Scatter the peoples who delight in war. Noble shall come from Egypt. Cush shall hasten to stretch out her hands to God. O kingdoms of the earth, sing to God. Sing praises to the Lord, to him who rides in the heavens and the ancient heavens. Behold, he sends out his voice, his mighty voice. Ascribe power to God, whose majesty is over Israel, and whose power is in the skies. Awesome is God from his sanctuary, the God of Israel. He is the one who gives power and strength to his people. Blessed be God. So, quite the lengthy psalm, full of interesting imagery. So, we will break this down slowly. So, in verse 1, God shall arise, his enemies shall be scattered, and those who hate him shall flee before him. And so, we have this image of the divine being moving up, moving to a place of authority over people who wish to usurp that authority, perhaps for themselves. And when this happens, when this alignment happens, when the truth is above those who wish to take it for themselves, these people can no longer be bound together, because the wicked have no longer control over everything beneath them. As smoke is driven away, so you shall drive them away. And so God is, in this case, like a sort of a gust of wind, blowing the smoke away. As wax melts before fire, so the wicked shall perish before God. And so we have two different images here. We have one of the image of smoke being driven away by God, which is sort of presumably this gust of fresh air. And we have the wax candle next to a fire. In both cases, the smoke and the wax cannot stand up to the force that pushes it, or the force that it comes into proximity with. And so when I think about this, I return to my original statement that I made about this hierarchy as the enemies of God, let's say, or the pursuers of lower goods that believe quite strongly. Perhaps they have strong reason to believe. But the totality of what they are doing does not match up with the sort of the structure of stability. If it does not match this structure of stability, as it gets higher and higher and higher, eventually it will collapse sort of under its own weight. It'll collapse under the proximity to the fire. It's hard to not use the same imagery here because it's useful to describe what would happen. Because this substance, this sort of lesser substance is approaching a substance that would subdue it, that would break it apart, that would move it into disunity. And so, rather than become this substance, one should become the substance that is one with the substance that would otherwise dissolve and separate the wax of the wax candle or the smoke, right? So in this case, the righteous must be like the flame. The righteous must be like the sort of the gust of wind that pushes the smoke away. Then in verse 3, immediately after these illustrations, but the righteous shall be glad, they shall exult before God, they shall be jubilant with joy. And that is because they have tried to move in alignment with whatever this thing is, this force is. And we don't even have to get into the question of the provability from a material standpoint of this God. We can remain imaginal for now, if it helps one conceptualize what we were talking about. Because we can boil this down to all levels of reality. And if we leave it at the level of the individual, I'd say that there are no shortage of instances, as we've talked about earlier in this podcast, about the forces that would subdue us. Now it's interesting that these forces that can subdue us can be evil, but they can also be good. And it's about our relationship to these things. That is, if we are evil and we move into this sort of state of undeserved or false goodness, that we approach the position of the divine authority, then we melt like the wax. Because we come into proximity, our makeup comes into proximity with something that is antagonistic to the form that we desire. So in this way, it's not really about, there's no material explanation here. It's purely imaginal for now. If we ever get to a material explanation, that is for a different point. But for right now, conceptually and philosophically, this is where it leads me. And so just like many psalms, after you get this dose of understanding, it goes into praise. This ebb and flow. This ebb and flow. So sing to God, sing praises to his name. Lift up a song to him who rides through the deserts. His name is the Lord, exalt before him. Father of the fatherless and protector of the widows is God in his holy habitation. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a parched land. So I'd like to continue for a moment with this idea of the ebb and flow, this moving into a certain understanding. Now, this understanding is nothing to say of the conversation that we were just having about the form and about the being that approaches this form that's antagonistic to it, the sort of wishful being that aspires to a certain way of being, moving into a new space, let's say, a new form, this form of goodness. We're not really going back to that. We're speaking in general here. The ebb and the flow. The ebb moving towards understanding, moving towards something that is intelligible, that makes sense, that agrees with us. And then the flow, which is to sort of repave the service, to give thanks, to sing, to praise, And in this we solidify our understanding. And so I guess in a sense it is almost like we are returning to the original thought, because we were praising that thought and we were holding it up. So we have it in our mind as we hold it up and we praise it. So perhaps that earlier statement that I said is not quite correct. What I would say, the addendum would be that every time we enter into this state of understanding, and I think this is the point that I was trying to get at, there are going to be periods of understanding or points of understanding that are obviously different than others. Different realizations at different times, different avenues of understanding, different things to know. Every time this happens, then the flow comes back in, the praise and the paving. We flow into the understanding and we ruminate in it. We pave that surface. We smooth it as smooth as we can get it to solidify it in our understanding. So when we get to verse 5 and verse 6, we have a little bit more here. Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. Now this is interesting, because Father of the fatherless. Now of course this doesn't mean that God becomes the physical father of another. It doesn't necessarily mean a child or a person now has a sort of new member of the family, this sort of stepfather that fulfills that role. What it does mean is that's that space that was at once occupied by the father, and the role and the responsibility that he had, the love that was his responsibility to give to that child. In that space, God fills it. God can fill it. Now that one of the outlets could be a material replacement for that, because it's sort of, the spirit takes form somehow, right? So it can take form in a conscious mind, it can take form of a stepfather, like we were saying, or it can come in any number of different ways. Anything that would fill that void, the goodness that fills that void, because of course we can imagine evil that comes in to fill it, but that is not God. Protector of the widows, sort of the protector of the vulnerable, is God in his holy habitation. So here we have this illustration of a sort of a place. We can again represent it as the imaginal, this space within our minds that safeguards an individual from predation. Protector of widows. It is, where is this space? Where does it exist? Of course, a more lofty question, does it exist without humanity, the human mind? And I'm not sure about that answer. What I can say is that certainly within the mind of the individual, she can find herself in that space, in that holy habitation, that is God. Also, I think it can be the case that there are any number of patterns in our external environment, whether it be interaction with another human being or a life event, that shocks one into the realization of that space, and that is God, and then that would be considered God's influence. Now, in a sense, this is sort of, unfortunately, impersonal. However, as soon as we allow ourselves to be drawn away and feel down and hopeless, that is when we have been drawn away from that space. We have been drawn away from God in that sense. So it's a tricky business. It can be a bit finicky to find yourself in the space. But I think this is where it is. It is this a difficult thing. It's a thing to find. It takes responsibility. It takes faith in the process of finding belief and the reason, the path to get there. But I think it exists there. And so we will put a pin in that. And we'll see what else we can make of it. What else we can find. God settles the solitary in a home. He leads out the prisoners to prosperity. But the rebellious dwell in a parched land. So, continuing with our imaginal here, this dwelling in a parched land can be sort of a land of psychological confusion, disruption, addiction, subordination to another, subordination to base desires. Or it could be literal. It could be a person or a people that find themselves without a home because of their actions, because of their iniquities, let's say. Okay, now verse 7. O God, when you went out before your people, when you marched through the wilderness, the earth quaked and the heavens poured down rain before God, the one of Sinai, before God, the God of Israel. So, when we imagine this, we imagine God in front of the Israelites. The sort of, we can imagine it as a rising sun, or as an illumination in an otherwise dark environment. And it's this very illumination, this, we can call the illumination, the marching through the wilderness. It caused the earth to quake, like one that is sort of full of anxiety, full of insecurity. It's a state of profound vulnerability, and this is the earth in its vulnerable state. And the heavens pour down rain. Now, the rain could be a symbol of this sort of washing away. It could be a symbol of fruitfulness, of potential growth, of sustainability. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. But what I think I can say, that I'm satisfied with, is that when this light came before man, the earth in the mind of man was subdued. It was reduced to this inferior state that man could then recognize and say, okay, this is our relationship to the earth, and the heavens is now pouring down rain for us to drink, for us to grow our crops, and so forth and so on. Rain in abundance, O God, you shed abroad. You restored your inheritance as it languished. Your flock found a dwelling in it. In your goodness, O God, you provided for the needy. So it's interesting, the flock, so God's people, the Israelites, they found a dwelling in it. What is it? In the inheritance. They found dwelling in this sort of ebb and flow. They found dwelling in the understanding and in the praise, because it led them to the truth. It led them to an independent state, a state of freedom for their own people. The Lord gives the word. The women who announce the news are a great host. The kings of the armies, they flee. The women at home divide the spoil. Though you men lie among the sheepfolds, the wings of a dove covered with silver, its pinions with shimmering gold. verse 11 and 12, the Lord gives the word. And this word is of strength, of power, and authority. Now the women who are the ones that remain at home, they don't go to war, and they announce that the kings of the armies, they flee. And women, they divide the spoils at home. They're sort of indirect recipients of the righteous fight. They can reap the benefits. Now, having thought about this interpretation, I don't think that that is exactly correct. In fact, I think it's totally incorrect. The Lord gives a word. So again, the word that comes from this place of authority and structure, stability. The women who announce the news are a great host, and so they are the ones that realize. They announce the word of God, or the effect of the word of God, and they see the kings of armies fleeing, and they divide the spoil at home. And this is while the men lie among the sheepfolds, meaning that they are asleep with the livestock in their pens, which seems to imply that they were not paying attention. And so the women, of course, in this case, are the ones that saw it, that heard, and that divided the spoil for their people. The wings of a dove covered with silver, its pinions with shimmering gold. This could just be a symbol of the magnificence of God, perhaps. When the Almighty scatters kings there, let snow fall on Zalman. So here we see the transformative nature of God. So as before, as we were talking about in the imaginal space, we found a space of where God rests. Sort of a difficult place to find, but it is a place of stability, security, structure. But also, what God is or God has, let's say, the ability to produce profound transformation. Transformation that otherwise would not have been deemed possible. So we see here a through line. Because how is one that is lost, sort of in the proverbial wilderness, how are they to come to God if there's no transformational process? But here we see suggested that this process also lies in the work of God. And so the following verses are sort of filled with imagery. We have the imagery of the mountain of Bashan, many peaks. Why do you look with hatred, O many-peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode? Yes, where the Lord will dwell forever. Sort of posed as a question. Perhaps it's a reflection on the inferior forms, let's say, of perceivable stability and structure. Or as an individual finds himself in a certain state of enlightenment, and then all of a sudden they figure out that they're not all that enlightened compared to somebody else, or they found a new avenue. It's a deeply crushing thing to one's ego and one's pride. So there is, I think, in this question, the essence of humility. It could be a completely wrong interpretation, but that's what it seems to me. You ascend on high, leading a host of captives in your train, and receiving gifts among men, even the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. Blessed be the Lord, who daily bears us up. God is our salvation, and to God, the Lord, belong deliverances from death. But God will strike the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. The Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan, I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that you may strike your feet in their blood, that the tongues of your dogs may have their portion from the foe. So quite dramatic language here, a bit vengeful. But it is about the return to justice, the idea of the possibility of justice, the recognition of those who have transgressed, and the return of punishment to those who have done wrong. Verse 30, rebuke the beasts that dwell among the reeds, the herds of bulls with the calves of the peoples. Trample underfoot those who lust after tribute. Scatter the peoples who delight in war. So we have an image here. The rebuking of the beasts that dwell among the reeds, and the herd of bulls with the calves of the people. And so I think it's this balance of this destructive force. A herd of bulls with the calves of the peoples is dangerous. Trample underfoot those who lust after tribute. That is, those who pay because they're trying to buy their way to peace and salvation. Artificial security is what they do when they pay tribute, rather than willfully sacrifice. Scatter the peoples who delight in war. Nobles shall come from Egypt. Cush shall hasten to stretch out her hands to God. And then we move back into the praise. It's this recognition and back into the praise. So verse 32 through 35 is just this. And it ends with, blessed be God. And so I'll finish this episode here. We'll begin next time with probably the longest psalm that we've encountered thus far. That is Psalm 69, titled, Save Me, O God.